Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tim Huxley, Executive Director of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Asia, here in Singapore. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this latest event in the IISS Fullerton Lecture series here in the ballroom of Singapore's historic Fullerton Hotel. We have with us this afternoon an audience including more than 100 guests drawn from quite a broad cross-section of Singapore's community, from the business, media, governmental, diplomatic and intellectual elements of the community. We organize roughly 6 IISS Fullerton Lectures every year. Over the last 2.5 years since the series started, the speakers have included the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, then President Calderon of Mexico, cabinet ministers from Australia, Canada, Germany, India, Japan, Philippines, and Singapore, the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, and Thailand's ex-Prime Minister, Abhisit, among others. And the most recent previous speaker in the series was Ukraine's President Poroshenko. The primary intent of the IISS Fullerton Lecture Series is to inspire informed and intelligent debate on matters of international importance from an international perspective. And I'm delighted that today's IISS Fullerton Lecture very much fits those criteria. Developments in Thailand in recent years have a significance that extends beyond Thailand and even beyond Southeast Asia. We're very lucky to have with us this afternoon for a conversation rather than a formal lecture, His Excellency Sihasak Phuangketkeow, who serves as Permanent Secretary, in other words, the top-ranking official in Thailand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we're extremely grateful to Sihasak for making the time to join us today for this discussion. Thank you very much. First, some words of introduction to Sihasak. He has been Permanent Secretary of Thailand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 2011. He'd previously served at the Thai embassies in Washington, D.C. and in Tokyo, and as Thailand's Consul General in Hong Kong. He was spokesman for the ministry in 2002 before becoming Deputy Permanent Secretary in 2006. In 2007, he became Thailand's permanent representative to the United Nations and to other international organizations in Geneva. During his time in Geneva, he was elected the President of the UN Human Rights Council between June 2010 and June 2011. He's also been an active contributor to the work of ASEAN. He was Thailand's senior officials meeting leader to ASEAN from 2006 to 2007, and again since 2011. He was Thailand's representative in the high-level task force that drafted the ASEAN Charter and the chair of the high-level panel on an ASEAN human rights body that drafted the terms of reference establishing the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. In sum, he is one of Thailand's most distinguished public servants. I'd like to organize today's conversation, Permanent Secretary, if you're happy with this, in the following way. Maybe I could start by asking Sihasak some questions about recent political developments in Thailand, and particularly the military intervention in politics earlier this year, on the 22nd of May. And then going on to talk about the impact of that quite significant change in Thailand's governance on the country's foreign policy, and then maybe some broader foreign policy questions. I think then we might have around 25 or 30 minutes in which members of the audience could also pose their own questions, and then I thought I might conclude the session with a final question of my own, looking forward to the future of Thailand. So, if I may, my first question. It's now almost 7 months since Thailand's military coup on 22nd of May. I remember, Permanent Secretary, that you were here about 10 days later for the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue, and on the sidelines of our conference, you gave your own press conference, and there you talked about the reason for the armed forces takeover, and you also talked about the schedule for the return of democracy. Since then, over the last 7 months, Thailand has been governed by the National Council for Peace and Order, the NCPO, led by the former Army Commander-in-Chief, General Prayut, whom the military-led National Legislative Assembly appointed as Prime Minister in August. The NCPO has established a National Reform Council and a Constitution Drafting Committee with the intention of, as I understand it, fundamentally reforming Thailand's political system with the aim of breaking the cycle of conflict that we've seen for the last decade or so. I think it would be very, very interesting and helpful and important if we could hear your frank assessment of how the reform process has been progressing over the last 6 or 7 months, and when we can expect to see the restoration in Thailand of something which we might call political normality.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here. And I see in the audience a few friends that I haven't met for a long time, Ambassador Tohak Kim and my classmate Dermsak. And certainly it's a pleasure for me to be here. Of course, I don't pretend to be an authority on Thai politics. I'm just your ordinary, everyday diplomat. But I do have to, these days spend a lot of time talking about where Thailand is heading. And as you mentioned, when I was here last time, it was during the Shangri-La Dialogue. And it was just, I think, a few days after the event of May 22nd. It's, just describing the event of May 22nd is also difficult. The appropriate word to use, military intervention, a military coup. But at that time, I had to spend a lot of time talking about why it took place. And I think the main thrust of my explanation was that it didn't come out of the blue. It's not something that we wanted, but it was, we had a very unfortunate situation. We were in a crisis, and had we gone the other direction, I think Thailand would have been worse off, and the region would have been worse off as well. And now, where is Thailand? Where is Thailand heading? Well, I'm sure you've read about the roadmap. We're in the process of the second stage of the roadmap, whereby we're concentrating on reform. It's a tall order, of course, because reform that we're contemplating right now is a reform process that covers so-called 15 areas of reform. And we only have a year to do that, and then we have to come up with a new constitution. Economically, I think we're getting back on track. We're doing our best to stimulate the economy. This year, it's about 1%, but next year, perhaps 4%. I think much of this has to do with the fact that we're investing in infrastructure. There is a major project to overhaul our outdated infrastructure, especially our train system, the train system in Thailand. And also, I think there's a lot of potential economically in terms of linking up with our neighbors, promoting more economic integration within the Mekong sub-region. So economically, I think we're on a track to return to growth again. Diplomacy, I think, of course, relations with our neighbors are very good. Relations with Japan, which has been put on hold, is also back on track. Relations with China, I think quite strong. Relations with India, because India sees Thailand as an important bridge to establish or enhance its presence in ASEAN. Even with Australia, I think they recognize the reality of the situation in Thailand, the need to maintain their long-term interests. But of course, with Western colleagues, we still have some work to do. The relationship has been curtailed. We understand their position. All we ask is that, we need some mutual respect. Please give us some time and space to do what we have to do. Ultimately, it's the Thai people that has to settle our problem, and our solutions will not come from even with the best of intention, from our friends. But all we ask is that don't do anything to impair the relationship over the long term, because Thailand is still the second biggest economy in ASEAN. We will be back sooner or later. So we do have to keep the relationship intact. So this is our message to our United States, to EU, that let's do what we have to do, but keep the relationship intact over the long term. Now, getting back to the political situation in Thailand, at the heart of it is the reform process. And I think we have to make it clear that the reform process is not going to be done within a year. We talked about reform before, and and much of what we're doing now will have to be continued. But at least we can provide a foundation for the reform process to continue. Second, for me, being a non-politician, I believe that the success of the reform process depends on this being a democratic and inclusive process. So I think that's very important. And thirdly, there is no panacea for the problems that we face, the deeply rooted political conflict, the very wide political divide, the polarization that we face. So we'll have to do a number of things. First, how do we ensure that, how do we address the situation of vote buying in our elections? Not easy, but perhaps, we should think about placing limitations on how much you can spend in elections, government-funded providing government funding for campaigns, maybe one way. How do we break the system of the patronage system in Thailand, whereby politicians oftentimes interfere in the appointments of senior bureaucrats? How do we improve our, and this is being talked about a lot, how do we improve our electoral system so that we ensure fair representation, proportional representation for all political parties? It shouldn't be a kind of winner-takes-all election. That was one of the problems that we face. And so these are, the process of reforms that we have to tackle. But ultimately, I think what is important is that we need to have what they say often in Thailand is a new social contract. We need to have conversation, a dialogue, especially among the political parties where Thailand is heading. We need to work on the basis of inclusiveness, as I mentioned, work on the basis of consensus, building common grounds, and trying to establish common values among all the political forces in Thailand. Because, like it or not, Thailand has changed from 40, 50 years ago. The power structure has changed. The political balance has changed. There are more actors. More people want to say in Thai body politics. So we do have to provide room for everyone to be part of this political process in Thailand, and especially to be part of the current reform process. So perhaps I'm not sure whether I've shed some light, but I think this is where we stand right now, and this is where we should be heading from my point of view.
Thank you very much. You alluded to some of the implications for Thailand's foreign relations, and I wonder if I could just ask you a little bit more about that, because that's I think that's of particular interest. The removal of the previous government, I think, has affected Thailand not just internally, but also in terms of its relations with other countries. And as you mentioned, I think there have been particularly some complications in relations with Western governments. For example, at one point, soon after the event, as you called it, of 22nd of May, there was some talk. There was some talk on the American side that that very important major military exercise, Cobra Gold, that has been held in Thailand for many years, that in 2015 that exercise might be cancelled or might be moved somewhere else. It looks now as if that exercise is going to go ahead, but in 2015 it may be on a smaller scale than has been the case in recent years. And on the other hand, some observers have noticed a growing closeness in Thailand's relations with China, and I think it would be very interesting to hear from you, Permanent Secretary, about how Thailand's foreign relations have fared over the last 6 or 7 months, and whether you see a change in Thailand's foreign policy direction, and particularly in terms of relations with Western governments. It's clear that there have been some differences of opinion. To what extent do you feel that your Western interlocutors are giving Thailand that respect and that space to sort out the problems that have become apparent in recent years?
Well, I think our foreign policy is that we want to be friends with everybody. And foreign affairs should be conducted on the basis of mutual respect, on the basis of mutual interest. So I think that is the basis for conducting foreign policy. Now, how a country views its interests vis-a-vis in its relations with another country is up to that particular country. But you mentioned about Cobra Gold and the fact that the Americans have been so generous as to allow the Cobra Gold to proceed, albeit on a smaller scale. Well, what I have to say is that actually the Cobra Gold exercise, you alternate between heavy year and light year, and so in fact this is a light year. So the scaling down is not, a reflection of the curtailment of relations between the United States and Thailand. That's the first point. Second point is that, the Cobra Gold exercise is not an act of charity. And, it's not in Thailand's interest alone. It's in the region's interest. It's in the United States' interest. So I think, that the fact that the United States has proceeded with the continuation of the Cobra Gold exercise is because it has decided it's in the United States' interest to keep Cobra Gold. So that's, and as I said, we have to have a relationship based on mutual respect. And no matter whatever pressure is placed upon Thailand, it will not solve Thailand's problem. It's a problem that we have to resolve ourselves. We have to work it out ourselves. And the other concern I have is there's always this issue in international relations we call, especially when I was president of the Human Rights Council, we call it double standard. I don't want to refer to a particular country by name, but we had a similar event happen in a country in the Middle East, probably even to a more severe extent, because we didn't imprison the leader of the prime minister. We didn't crack down on any political parties. All, those who were detained 5 or 6 days have been released. But the relationship with that particular country has not been scaled down to the extent that, they have scaled down relations with Thailand. So, so the message that I have tried to communicate to our Western friends is that, please, let's think about the long-term interest. And don't have to think so much about Thailand, but think about the long-term interests. Think about Thailand's stability, how important is Thailand's stability to the region. And again, keep the relationship intact, because Thailand will be back sooner or later. And what we have to do right now, I think in terms of foreign policy, is to consolidate ourselves. Definitely, political stability is very important. Democracy is important. But what I see right now is that we have to concentrate in our neighborhood, because more and more ASEAN will be the center of economic growth in a rising Asia. And within ASEAN, I see the center of economic activities, maybe even the center of gravity moving towards mainland Southeast Asia. And in mainland Southeast Asia, what you see right now is the rise of the Mekong sub-region. And countries in the Mekong sub-region are busy opening up their economies, engaging in economic reforms, linking up among neighbors. And Thailand is poised to play a big role because of our geographical location. So what we're doing right now, the word that you hear so often is connectivity and connectivity. And this is what we're doing right now, maintaining our relations, political relations with our neighbors, enhancing our economic relations, promoting connectivity. We have the North-South Economic Corridor, East-West Economic Corridor. We're establishing special economic zones, 5 points along the border with each of our neighboring countries. And I think we can and we have to convert our geographical location. This is our strength, to show that we can play a strategic role in the region. And right now, this is our priority. We're not going so far. At the same time, you've mentioned about China. We don't have any intention at all to play the China card. You don't do that, I don't think. We want to be friends with everyone. But it so happens that China, once everything is business as usual, relationship is being dictated by the growing interest that we have together, the growing opportunities for more cooperation between China and Thailand, China and ASEAN. Prime Minister Li Keqiang is coming for the GMS Summit, the Greater Mekong Sub-Region Summit, China, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. And on the sideline of this summit, 2 important agreements will be signed. One is for the long-term purchase of agricultural products from Thailand. The other is for China's participation in the construction of a higher speed, not a high speed, but a higher speed train project from the northeast, Nong Khai, which borders Laos, to Bangkok, and then to the eastern seaboard, which is a major deep sea port, and also a major industrial complex in Thailand. And this train project can be later on can be connected with the train projects that you're building from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur. And China also plans to build a train system, a rail system, from the southern part of China through Laos, and this would connect with the train system that we're building in the northeast of Thailand. So this visit is important in that sense. But it's not about playing the China card or anything. It just so happens that there is, I think, growing opportunities for more cooperation between Thailand and China. But the bottom line is that we want to be friends with everyone.
I think it's absolutely clear that for Thailand there are great benefits in terms of building connectivity with your neighbors in mainland Southeast Asia and also with China. On the question of China, though, there have been important differences between some ASEAN countries and China in recent years, particularly focused on the South China Sea. So we see a sort of paradox in China's relations with Southeast Asia, that China is seen as a very important economic partner, but for some Southeast Asian countries, there is frankly a degree of unease about China's assertiveness and the way that China is using her power in the maritime domain. How does that look from a Thai perspective? And are you able to use your I think it's clear a special relationship with China to influence China's behavior in relation to other ASEAN countries?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can make any claims to influence the course of events in China or the conduct of its foreign policy. But you know, of course, we talk about rising China. The main concern we have is which way China is heading. I still believe that the intention is to be a peaceful rise, because China continues to give priority to its economic development, and China still faces a lot of domestic challenges. But at the same time, China is a rising power, and China wants to be recognized as such. And so we have to accommodate the rise of China, and any attempt to close the door to a rising China, I think will lead to China trying to create a new regional order. And certainly we want China to be part of the present regional order. But we've had our problems, ASEAN, in dealing with China. And Thailand has assumed the role of the coordinator of ASEAN-China relations for I think two years now. And the message, and we particularly, we have had this problem of the South China Sea with China. And when we took over the coordinatorship, we simply told China that they should not allow the issue of South China Sea to come to define the overall relationship. And secondly, the way they've been behaving becomes a barometer for the direction that a rising China is heading. It generates a lot of concern. And so we've clearly, tried to convey that message to the Chinese that I think they're being too assertive. They should, try to get our relationship back on track. You may recall that when ASEAN also had its problem because we couldn't come up with a common position on South China Sea. And so as coordinator, we've been also very careful to coordinate ASEAN's position each time we meet with the Chinese to have not a united front, but a common position. And it's difficult because Thailand has no claim. We don't want to be part of the bilateral disputes. But the South China Sea is an issue of concern to all the ASEAN countries because it concerns peace and stability of the region. And so we told the Chinese that, when we take a common position on the South China Sea, it's not as if, they always say we gang up on China, which is, nearly impossible. But we told them that please look at our position. When it's about peace and stability, we have a common concern. But when it's about disputes, our position is that the disputes will have to be resolved bilaterally by the parties concerned based on international law. So Chinese should not be overly concerned when ASEAN adopts a common position on South China Sea. In fact, they should be happy because they need a strong, united, cohesive ASEAN. They need to promote the centrality of ASEAN. And if ASEAN cannot have a common position on South China Sea, then our credibility, our so-called centrality is affected. So this is, how we've tried to deal with China and try to put our relations between China and ASEAN back on track.
Thank you very much. Could I ask you a little bit more about the question of economic relations with China? Thailand has signed up to the Chinese-sponsored Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, and I think that raises the question of how do you see other Chinese initiatives in the region, particularly the free trade area of the Asia Pacific, and do you think that is a proposal which is equally as attractive as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or more attractive? And how do you what do you see as the best way for the, I suppose you might call it, the regional trade order to develop? And clearly, economic interdependence with China is going to become even more important in the future. How does that affect your economic relationship with Japan? Is there any sort of trade-off, or is it possible to expand interdependence with China while also continuing to develop economic relations with Japan and with US-sponsored trading arrangements?
Well, on the Chinese proposals, I think they have come up with a number of initiatives in conjunction with the celebration of the 40th anniversary of ASEAN-China relations last year. First, the so-called Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, which some have concern with whether it's going to compete with ADB. Do we need another development bank? They have the so-called Maritime Silk Route, the revival of the Maritime Silk Route, which means that maybe the epicenter of the region economy is flowing from Beijing. And also they propose a bilateral treaty with ASEAN, Treaty of Good Neighborly Friendship. And some have concerns that, these days we should go with regionalism rather than bilateralism. There is concern that if you take all this together, maybe this is a kind of new regional order that's emerging, and an order that is China-centric. Some see it that way. But from our perspective, as long as it does not compete with existing institutions, as long as what the Chinese are proposing complement what we have already, I think it's good. Now, the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, if it's not competing with ADB, if its decision-making process is transparent, it's good, because we do need huge amount of investment infrastructure in the region if we're going to promote the kind of integration that we want to achieve. And also, China has this proposal for the free trade for the Asia Pacific, and whether that's competing with TPP. We don't see it as competing, because we think that the more free trade, the better for the region. So for us, what is important is to make sure that these initiatives do not compete with what is taking place already, should add to what is being done. And I think this would be good for the region as a whole. As for whether our relations with China is going to affect our economic relations with Japan, I think the pie is big enough for everyone to take part, whether in Thailand, our infrastructure development project, whether it's in the Mekong sub-region. So we don't see it as a zero-sum game.
Thank you very much. I've asked you quite a few questions, and I must thank you for answering them so comprehensively and helpfully. It's been really great to have the chance to discuss domestic developments to some extent, and also some important aspects of Thailand's foreign policy. I think now is the chance for our audience to pose some questions to you as well, if you're happy with that. Could I ask any members of the audience who'd like to ask a question, just please raise your hand. Stay where you are. The microphone will come to you, and if I've recognized you and you have the microphone, if you could just say who you are, what your affiliation is, or what you do, and then please keep your question as brief and as much to the point as is possible. Sir.
Thank you and good afternoon. I have a question about possible reform in Thailand foreign policy. Is that one of the priority area? If so, what do you expect to see in any reform in the Thai foreign policy? My name is Sihasak from the ASEAN Studies Center.
Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, I have to ask you, what do you mean by reform of Thai foreign policy? A redirectioning or refocusing, or the internal process of foreign policy? Well, the main, as far as I'm concerned, is that, how to position Thailand in the present strategic landscape. You have, I talked about this when I was attending the Shangri-La Dialogue. You have the dichotomy in the regional situation in terms of geoeconomics. We have more integration, more cooperation, and that has helped to underpin peace and prosperity in the region. But in terms of geopolitics, things are heading towards more competition, more rivalry, especially among the major powers. I think, of course, initially our concern was the relationship between China and the United States, but I think they're in the process of working out some kind of a modus vivendi. But we're still concerned about the relations between China and Japan. Even though they shook hands on the sideline of the APEC, if you look at the expression on the faces of both leaders, it wasn't really that friendly. So we're concerned. And so how do we position ourselves in the context of this shifting geopolitics? I think Thailand, as I mentioned, really have to, first of all, concentrate on our platform. Our platform, first of all, is our neighboring country, because I see the center of growth within ASEAN moving towards mainland Southeast Asia. In reality, ASEAN, not in terms of the division, but there might be two ASEAN emerging: maritime ASEAN and mainland ASEAN. And Thailand has to place itself at the center of this growing integration, growing economic activities within mainland ASEAN. And we're in a good position to do so because of our geographical location. And the other platform, of course, is ASEAN. And so we have to work hard on strengthening the unity and cohesiveness of ASEAN, the centrality of ASEAN. And if we can, first of all, strengthen our strategic role in the region vis-a-vis our neighboring country within ASEAN, I think the relationship with the other countries will be based on their calculation of their interests and the role that they perceive Thailand as playing within the region. So this is, I think, the direction where we should be heading right now in terms of our foreign policy, because it's going to be difficult at this moment until we have elections to try to win over our friends, Western friends, United States, EU, because their relationship will have to be put on hold, I think, until after the election. In the meantime, we have to concentrate within our neighborhood.
That's very interesting. You talked about the emergence of two ASEANs, a mainland ASEAN and a maritime ASEAN. How serious a threat do you think that or how serious a challenge does that pose to the bigger goal of maintaining ASEAN's unity and centrality?
No, I'm just reflecting, I think, a reality that, within mainland, there'll be more integration, definitely, because the geography is right for integration. Maritime, I think they will have to deal with some contentious issues. But still, we have to keep the unity of ASEAN, the 10 countries of ASEAN, the cohesiveness, our clout, our weight depends very much on ASEAN being united as a community of 10 nations.
Next question, please. Sir, in the fourth row back.
Hi, my name is Sean Yakota. I work for SEB, which is a Swedish bank. You mentioned before that stability in Thailand is important for the region as well. So if there were instability, can you provide one or two countries that would be impacted the most and how they would be impacted? Thank you.
Of course, in terms, well, I don't think I would want to engage in, guessing, which country will be impacted the most. I think the whole region, ASEAN as a whole, will be affected because Thailand, as I said, is the second biggest economy in ASEAN. And if we are faced with prolonged instability, it's going to affect what ASEAN is trying to do, especially in terms of our economic integration. So I think it's not any one particular country, but the whole of ASEAN would be affected by instability in Thailand.
Thank you. Next question, please. Madam, here, third row back here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pon from Rojana Kiratikan from Bloomberg. I would like to ask you about which industries would benefit first from the integration of AEC and your view of labor mobility. Thank you so much.
Well, as we integrate within ASEAN and as Thailand integrate its economy with our neighboring countries, Thailand will have to shift in terms of its production from being a manufacturing base towards more service, towards more logistics. And this is why we're investing a lot in terms of our infrastructure. And we have to think, right now, if you listen to the speeches by General Prayut, he's always talking about Thailand +1. That means the way we look at our economy, the way we look at in terms of investment in trade, we cannot just look at Thailand alone. We have to develop together with our neighboring countries So that this Thailand plus one concept will be something that drives our economic planning. And this is also true for many Japanese companies right now. When I was in Japan, they talked about Thailand. In fact, they had a chart saying that Thailand was more or less an extension of the Japanese economy, especially for automobile industry. But now there's another extension. That means from Thailand, a lot of the manufacturing will be relocated to our neighboring countries. So this Thailand plus one concept, I think, is important in terms of thinking about the future of economic development in Thailand. And definitely, labor mobility is important because in Thailand we have a shortage of workers. And right now we have about 3 to 4 million workers from neighboring countries, mostly from Myanmar, in Thailand. We don't know the exact figure, to be very frank, because most of them are not registered. The challenge right now is to have them registered and to ensure that they are treated equally under our law. Because the other problem that we have, in addition to the problems of democracy in Thailand, the other problem that, in fact, the more serious problem that we face right now is problem concerning human trafficking, problem concerning forced labor, which gives Thailand a very bad impression. And that could lead later on, if we don't address this problem, towards some kind of trade sanctions. So we have to deal with the issue of migrant workers in Thailand and get them registered. So we do need to change our mindset with regard to the way we promote economic development with our neighbors. We need to promote more complementation in terms of economic development with our neighbors.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, yes?
Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm a student at NUS. Recently, Prime Minister Prayut has commented that the elections will be pushed to 2016. So in your opinion, do you see any potential backlash from the opposition groups as well as the international community? Thanks.
Well, this time around, we have to get it right, because Thailand cannot afford another event like May 22nd again. The world has changed a lot, and so we do have to get it right. And if it takes a few more months, I think you should show some understanding, because there might not be another opportunity for Thailand to get it right, and we have to get it right this time. So I hope that our friends in the international community who wants to see stability, long-term stability in Thailand, sustainable democracy, will see things in that context. But I've been traveling with General Prayut, on all his trips. He said we have 1 year to finish our work, to do as much as possible. What we intend to do may not be completed within 1 year, but hopefully we will have passed the baton to the next government in a very, in a very good way. And so the intention is 1 year. But if perhaps if it's necessary, we might need 1 or 2 more months. But I think what is important is to think about how to ensure that once we get back to democracy, democracy is here to stay in Thailand.
Thank you very much. If I may, I have one question that I'd still like to ask you, and this is quite a big question, and it is about Thailand's future. It's a big question, but quite a simple one. Where do you think Thailand will be in about 5 years' time?
Where? Well, it depends on getting things right. Now, if we can get back to full-fledged, sustainable democracy, I think, we will be well placed to seize the opportunities that's coming up with ASEAN community, with the rise of Asia. Because Thailand, in many respects, we have many advantages. We're a country that is known as being moderate. We're a bridge builder. We don't espouse extremism. Fundamentally, our economy is strong. And we're also well placed economically to take advantage of the growing opportunities in the region. What we have to do, of course, is how to get out of this so-called middle income trap. And that's why we need to improve our infrastructure. That's why we have to restructure our economy. These things we have to do. But most importantly, as I said, we have to get Thai politics right, because that has always been the drawback when it comes to Thailand. We've had how many coups already? 19, 20. And as I said, and I was representing my country in Geneva on the Human Rights Council. And at that time, we had the coup in 2006. And I said that and at that time, we had a lot of goodwill. Thailand is a country where we have many friends, people have goodwill towards Thailand, and they're willing to sort of overlook Thai politics. But another coup, I don't want to call it a coup, another event like May 22nd, it's going to be difficult for Thailand, In spite of the fact that we have everything going for Thailand, we have to get our politics right. That's the most important thing. And we have an opportunity right now to get things right, and we cannot fail. And this is something that all Thais, regardless of the political colors that they profess, we're in this boat together, and we have to work on this.
Thank you very much for answering that question with such frankness. I'm very sorry to say that soon I need to bring this Fullerton Lecture to a close, but before doing that, I'd like to thank you, Permanent Secretary, for making the time to come to Singapore and have this conversation. We've been privileged to hear your assessments from the viewpoint of one of Thailand's most senior officials and your country's most senior diplomat of a range of political and foreign policy issues. I think it's an understatement to say that the last decade has been a difficult stage in Thailand's political evolution, but as you've explained today, the current reform process is intended to provide a way, as you put it, of getting it right, of escaping the destructive cycle that's characterized Thailand's politics in recent years. And you've also been kind enough to discuss in quite a lot of detail Thailand's foreign policy, relations with ASEAN neighbors, relations with China, and relations with the West. I think it's clear, like other countries in Southeast Asia, Thailand needs to make sure that its foreign policy is managed adroitly in a part of the world which is characterized by very complex sub-regional relations with neighbors, and also is in the midst of a degree of competition between major powers politically and economically. And I think there's no doubt that you've played a major role in executing as well, perhaps in terms of shaping Thailand's foreign policy, and that you've provided, I'm sure, substantial continuity despite changes of government. So we've been very fortunate to have the chance to listen to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope that I only hope that tomorrow when I get back to Thailand, I don't read the papers and see myself quoted in the press, and then being asked to report myself to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sihasak.